Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to see you again. Today we're doing something a little bit special, but before then, I'm going to do a bit of shameless self-promotion. My next book, Hapless Homesteader, comes out on October 1st, and it is available for pre-order. I am also currently working on the audiobook and hope to have that out sometime in the next few months. And with that bit of shameless self-promotion out of the way, today we are reviewing The Long Moonlight by YouTuber Razorfist. Now, first and foremost, I encourage everyone out there to grab your own copy of this book. What I like, others might not like, and what others like, I may not like. You never know until you try it, and that's the beauty of reading, is that there is just something out there for everybody. Now, let's start off with saying that I'm a bit biased when it comes to Razorfist. I am a big fan of his work, I watch all of his rants, and given the nature of my day job, I actually spend quite a bit of time listening to his live streams. So I'm going to attempt to go through this with as little bias as I can. And that being said, I was looking forward to this book, and I decided if I was going to read it, we're going to get a review of it. So anyway, let's start with the story, and then we'll move to what I like, what I don't like, and my thoughts on the book. So the story follows master thief Xerdes as he is breaking into a fairly high-end pub that he just intends to rob. He starts by stealing some silver casks off the mantel, lamenting the fact that he can't get behind the bar because all the glasses would raise too much alarm. Deciding it would be best to check upstairs, he starts to hear something coming from a closed room. Looking through the keyhole, he sees a fence that he is on fairly good terms with, basically getting the beat down by somebody he doesn't recognize. It takes him a few moments before a name is dropped, and he realizes that this is one of the larger crime lords in the city. Now, Xerdes has a bit of a moral conundrum here because, well, I say moral, there's very little that he's doing that's moral. The fence that is apparently about to be killed is his preferred fence. The guy gives him a bit more money, even though he can be a bit of a pain to deal with. Xerdes decides to basically try to protect his own best interests and sort of launches an assault on the crime lord, but basically just says, hey, don't kill that dude, untie him, let him go, and then disappears into the night. Not exactly the daring rescue you would want to have. As he is beginning to leave, he runs into an assassin named Ceres, and Ceres is, let's just call her a female barbarian. She's there with two others, and Xerdes, being a master of stealth, basically gets the jump on all of them. First he takes out her two accomplices, and then he starts attacking her. And the way the fight is described, it sounds like he's basically broken her arm as she's trying to fend him off. And to gain the upper hand, she pulls out a torch and lights it and throws it towards the stairwell. Keeping in mind, she lit this torch with a flint and steel, I believe, and hurled it with one arm while using her broken arm to fend off Xerdes. Either way, the building immediately catches fire. Ceres gets a fairly good look at Xerdes, who has basically beaten her into submission at this point, and Xerdes grabs her sword, a sword to which she is sworn to, and she immediately swears that she's going to track him down and get her sword back. Xerdes gives her a little snide quip and is out into the night. He has a slight attack of conscience and actually drags Ceres and her two accomplices out into an alley where they lie unconscious and beaten and bruised. We then catch back up with Xerdes as he heads to one of his hideouts. And he's been there for a little while when he notices that there's someone else there. Skulking downstairs, he is immediately apprehended by Ceres, who's pushing a knife into the back of his neck, asking where all their stuff has gone. Xerdes is nothing if not a smug, arrogant little prick, and basically tells him to go pound sand. Ceres' two accomplices start digging around the floors, eventually finding a loose floorboard and pulling up a sack of trinkets and goods. Believing it's probably what they're looking for, they start digging through the sack, and they're finding some things that are of moderate value, but nothing of what they were looking for, when one of them discovers a fragile glass globe which they immediately break, releasing a semi-sentient purple smoke into the room that immediately paralyzes them and starts to choke them out. Xerxes reveals that this was a decoy bag, and that the purple smoke is only dangerous to those who are afraid of dying from it, which I believe is a nice little touch for a magical defensive system. Because it also gives that psychological edge to anybody who's trapped there. You just laugh and tell them, hey, don't be scared and you won't die. Rather cruel and sadistic, but this is the underworld we're talking about. Xerxes tells Ceres that she'll probably be fine because of her people's blood. She's more likely to be enraged than scared, and he simply leaves off into the night. After this little diversion, Xerxes decides it's time to go rob a mansion. And it's during this time that he laments that others are into high-status crimes, that they go into the high society crimes and blah, blah, blah. And this struck me as rather odd because his first place that he robbed was an upscale pub, and the second place he robs, well, it's a mansion. It's a massive mansion, and he has reason to believe it belongs to a crime lord. He enters through the basement, and upon entering the first chamber, is hit with the first trap, which launches a dart that hits him in the leg. Not noticing anything immediately wrong, he simply removes the dart, bandages the leg, and continues on his prowl through the mansion. It's about the third or fourth room when he starts to feel a little bit strange as he's stealing silver daggers off the wall. And he suddenly realizes that the dart that hit him was poisoned. With all the finesse of a drunken frat boy trying to chase sorority girls on a Friday night, he attempts to stumble his way out of the mansion, becoming progressively more inebriated as he goes. By the time he reaches the front door and opens it up, he is apprehended by, you guessed it, Ceres. As he's waking up on a fainting couch, he is brought face to face with the crime lord who owns the house. A crime lord who shares the name with the man who trained him. And he has an offer that will be hard for Xerxes to refuse. Now this will bring you to just shy of the halfway point of the book. And normally I wouldn't cover this far, but it's a very, very short book, and this seems to be the most cliffhanger I can bring you to. So let's get into what I like, what I didn't like, and my thoughts. So first, what I liked. There are some funny quips in this. Razorfist is a talented orator, and he does crack some funny jokes on his shows, and his sense of humor is very present in the book. I do like the low magic setting, and that magic is not only rare, but people simply don't like dealing with it because it's so obscure. And I'm a big fan of security through obscurity. Protect your things with things that people don't understand. Also, Razorfist does a really good job with the accent play in books. Now, it is heavily discouraged for authors to use the phonetic way that people talk in a book, because not everybody can understand it. It's a true skill to master. It can be very difficult to do. And while he doesn't cover much more than some obscure British accents, he does a good job. I can hear their voices in my head. I can understand what the characters are saying, which is an achievement in and of itself. It's not an easy thing to do. Next, I really do like the villains. I've always been a villain connoisseur. The main villain, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I know I'm going to get it wrong, I like him because he's the kind of villain who's just, how can I best phrase this? He's aloof and highly intelligent. You could tell he'd be a chess grandmaster if he chose to pursue the sport. Also, as a side note, this is a pulp, and as a pulp it has pictures of various things, the various characters, things to really put you in the atmosphere, and the art is really well done, which we have to thank George Alexopoulos for, because he's the one who did the art for this. And if you're not familiar with his artwork, it's simultaneously funny, political, and nightmare fuel at times. And I do have to give props, the final battle was fairly well executed. And with that said, let's get into the mainstay of this, which is going to be the things I didn't like. And again, I want to preface this by saying, Razorfist is a talented orator. If you haven't checked out his rants, I advise you do so. He has a unique way of talking. He can make even fairly hard to say and hard to follow things funny, quippy. easy to get along with. He's a very talented orator, which is no doubt part of what has made him as successful as he is. And that being said, Razorfist writes a lot like how he talks. And Razorfist has a massive lexicon. This man has a vocabulary that honestly puts me and many of the other authors I know to shame. But when you put that in writing, it can be difficult. I believe there are several points where I simply had to stop and go, that was a very odd choice of words. There are parts where he does things like calls a very large door obese, which, yes, I know what he's talking about, but it just doesn't flow well. There is a notorious paragraph, which I'm not going to attempt to read, which seems to have 7 different words for black, and it's just too much. There's too many adjectives, there's too many descriptors, and while this works great with Razorfist's oratory style, if you put it in your prose, if you put it in your exposition, it becomes exhausting very, very quickly. This was a very short book, and I had to put it down several times because I was just tired. He has a lot of very obscure words, and in several cases, he's a very big fan of the word purloined. Now, I'm never going to condemn anybody for having a large vocabulary, but this is like a fireworks show over a casual dinner. It's distracting, it's misplaced, it's taking away from the story itself. It also had the problem that it kept pulling me out of the story. I kept finding myself for a page or two being drawn in, being excited to see what happens, and then I hit this verbal cacophony. And like I've said, with his rants, this is great, but with your writing, with your exposition, you want to keep it simple. You don't want to break people out of that daydream, and it can be very hard to do. Furthermore, the action scenes kind of threw me off, especially the scene with Xerxes and Ceres meeting for the first time. It sounds like, given the description, that Xerxes breaks her arm and she continues to defend herself. And then she pulls out a torch from her bag while continuing to defend herself with her broken arm, and using a flint and steel, with one hand, lights this torch and throws it. And there's a few other examples throughout the book that are like this, and the broken arm thing is never addressed again, so I'm assuming he didn't actually break her arm, but the description made me believe that her arm was broken. And like I said, this is several scenes throughout here that I'm being corrected. It's at the beginning I wasn't sure he was in a pub, and oh wait, he's in a pub. I thought he was robbing a house. Also, Xerxes says that he doesn't want to take part in high society crimes, but up until the halfway point of the book, the only things we've seen him rob were this upscale pub and this crime lord's mansion. And it sounds like, yeah, he doesn't like that people are into high status crimes, but he himself is committing high-status crimes. And that brings me into Xerxes himself. Now, maybe it's just some of the distracting nature of the dialogue and the exposition, but I felt like I didn't have a good grasp of his character. Xerxes is supposed to be inspired by the main character from the video game series Thief, a game series I haven't played. And that's another problem with this book, is that I'm approaching it as an outsider. I've never been a big fan of pulps, I've never really known about them, and I've never played the game Thief. And I imagine if you've done both, you might get more of a kick out of the story, because from what I understand, he approaches the character well. But from someone who's not familiar with the games, he didn't feel very well characterized. He's very quippy, but I just couldn't relate to him, and then when bad things happen in his life, I couldn't feel sorry for him. It's a problem that I have with a lot of the characters in this story. I can't find myself getting attached to them, even the ones that I like. Also, he has a love interest in the story, and without trying to spoil too much, she's kind of the cause for him later on having a very high body count. While she's there often, she's not well utilized. I just couldn't believe his anger later on in the book. And while the story is a little bit predictable, I feel like his love interest could have been replaced with almost any other provocation. While it is hinted that Xerxes' old master really emphasized them not killing unless they had to, by the end of the book, Xerxes has a fairly high body count. And while I understand that he's a thief and he's more of an intellectual criminal, he's a force to be reckoned with when it comes to combat. He doesn't feel as threatened as he needs to, which leads me to another gripe. There's a character throughout the book called Inspector Coggins, and he's supposed to be this no-nonsense, very cerebral inspector. He's kind of a savant inspector. He's not very good with people, but the man notices things that other people don't, and I feel he was severely underutilized. Throughout the book, I'm not convinced that Xerxes is threatened at all, and it would have been a great use in the story to have Coggins hot on his trail, this unfeeling, emotionless inspector who can just see through all this stuff, and being hot on this man's heels would have given a feeling of threat to Xerxes. It would have given him something to strive against, which would have made the end of the book a much greater payoff. And I did like the final fight. There's also one thing in this that does annoy me, and a lot of writers do this, and this is personal taste. A lot of the problems Xerxes faces at the end of the book, and the crime lords face at the end of the book, comes from what I like to call they didn't pay the hitman. And the rule of anybody who is very high in a criminal organization should know you always pay the hitman. It doesn't matter if the hit looks like they died of natural causes. If they ask to be paid, you paid them because of what they do as a profession. If you don't want those talents used against you, you pay them when they ask. This is kind of basic knowledge, and I see it in a lot of books. It's like, oh, I'm powerful, and I don't have to pay the people who work under me. And I don't think enough people realize that the reason this person is powerful is because they pay the people under them. They keep the great talent that they have. They always pay the hitman, and I wish people would get that. You always pay the hitman. But that's my personal gripe. Now, let's get into my thoughts. First of all, this book needed probably a developmental editor and a line editor. I remember listening to one of his live streams where he took more of a dominant role in getting this book produced, and I really, really wish that he had run this through at least a line editor. Somebody who could have tamed down some of his language. Because, again, while his oratory style is great for rants, both political and entertainment related, it doesn't translate well into exposition. Exposition needs to be kind of simple to move people seamlessly from one scene to the next. If it's overly complicated, if it's overly flowery, or if it doesn't feel like it belongs in that setting, i.e. purple prose, it's going to be more of a distraction than a segue, and that's all your exposition needs to be, is a segue. Furthermore, a developmental editor probably could have pointed out a lot of the problems in here, and I get it, developmental editors are expensive. But Razor Fist is fairly successful, and he was working with a publishing company already. I'm surprised they didn't give him a developmental editor. Somebody to help him along with the story. He has a very big crowd, and a lot of people have already read this and like this, and sometimes I wonder if it's not because of his personality. Razor Fist is a very entertaining guy, and I think a lot of that is what's carrying this story. But again, it needed an editor. This is also a problem of people who are already fairly successful who try to break into the writing space. They already have a following, and they already have people who are going to like what they make regardless of its actual quality because they like the person who made it. And that can be a great thing for the individual, but it does hamper your growth because people might be too afraid to tell you what's wrong. And while I do like Razor Fist, and I intend to continue watching Razor Fist, I'm not the biggest fan of his writing. It doesn't feel like this book was ready. Now, another thought that I had, and something I want to bring up to people as to one of the reasons why I do these book reviews. I learned a lot by reading this book. I was personally on the fence about a lot of adjectives and adverbs, And I feel like I've learned a lot about their use and their overuse while reading this. And it's one of the reasons I do these reviews, not only to look at what other people do, but to learn from what other people have done and how I personally feel about it. And that's really the only way you can approach writing, is how you personally feel about your writing. You have to go experience these things in order to learn how to better your own writing. From what I understand, Razor Fist is a very well-read guy, but I don't think he's read as much as an author as he needs to. Now that he's had some experience with writing, I do hope he continues to improve, because the bones of a good story were here. Yes, the story was kind of predictable. Yes, it wasn't the most complex story on earth, but it had the possibility of being at least entertaining. And that is what we're all striving to be, is entertaining. And I do hope he continues, and I do hope he seriously works on improving his exposition. Please, if you ever listen to this, Razor Fist, get a developmental editor. Get somebody out there, because you do have good stories here. You just need help with the polish. And with that, I wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.